This is all about managing role creep and how to say no, which I think is a really important topic for nannies. But before we do that, I'm Matt. I'm the founder of Army of Nannies, an online search platform that connects families to nannies. And we have lovely Anna here as well. Anna.
Hello. So I'm Anna. I run Anna Turner Consultancy, and I'm here basically to give you confidential space to talk about anything in your career and help you with your development any stage. So that's in a nutshell what I do.
It's even more exciting than that, isn't it? Because it's pretty new. This is new out the block.
It is pretty new. It is pretty new. So I worked previously as a nanny for over 14 years. Worked a little bit as a play therapist and then moved into recruitment. And I think one of the things that I felt throughout all of that is that there's no one place for a nanny to just confidentially explore what's going on in their lives. And also, I think there's a lot of misinformation around, employment and how you start employment. So I wanted to create something that can support entirely for nannies and maternity nurses.
So I'm very lucky because we partner with you, and I immediately partnered with you because I know of your experience before starting this, and I always look out, and we have other partners as well in a similar space, but by no means the same, but anything that's there to help nannies on their career path, on their track, I think it's a real force for good, especially when it comes with your experience and know-how as well. I think it's going to be a really good thing. So annaturnerconsultancy.com, go and check it out. So it's all about role creep and how to say no. Anna, you've got some thoughts on this. Why do you think it's a really important area?
Yeah, so I think it's an important topic just purely on the fact that it happens almost without us even realizing. I think that's probably the main thing to say, is that I don't think a lot of it is intentional role creep. I think it just happens over a period of time. And then before you know it, you can find yourself a little bit ragged, a bit tired. Maybe your pay isn't paid all the time on time. Maybe your hours have started to extend. Maybe duties have started to creep in that weren't agreed at the beginning. And I think it's very difficult then, when you haven't noticed that happening, to then have a conversation with the family you're working for and say, hey, listen, I'm noticing X, Y, and Z. So I think you and I both agree that, to try and give some tools and some guidance around how you can avoid getting into that situation, because it's never comfortable, and nannies really work from the heart, so it's always a difficult place to start trying to put in boundaries when you're already with the family for a long time.
I think when we started to sound out what would we do as a first topic, because I think this will be the first of many, hopefully the technology will help us do it with more of a community aspect. You gave an example of it's happened to you, hasn't it? You were in a role, and I think one of your early roles.
Yeah, so I remember working for a lovely family, and everything was agreed perfectly at the beginning of my contract. And then as time went on, I was being asked to do more and more babysits. Sometimes I would be told that my babysit would finish at a certain time, and then I'd be asked to stay over. And then I was also noticing that sometimes my pay wasn't being paid on time. And before I knew it, I was honestly doing around 70 to 80 hours a week. And the impact on me as a person, just my mental health and being able to actually give the children the energy that they need, was almost getting to zero. And I hadn't realized, because I'm a nice person and I want to please and I want to go above and beyond. So yeah, it affected me greatly, and then it was very difficult when you're in that sort of frazzled place to then have the strength to say, hey, listen, this is really affecting me, because you're almost caught on the family's carousel of life. So
I think Nanny said to me when we posted the title is, what is role creep? By role creep, I mean those just things that happen over time. It's almost a bit like Roald Dahl and the Twits, when the walking stick gets longer and the stool gets shorter, and before you know it, you think you're shrinking. It's very slight changes in, and it can just chip away over time. And what makes this really difficult for nannies is that most nannies are there, they're just constantly saying yes. It's inbred in them to try and fix situations. Can you do? Yeah, of course I can do. And they're
Yeah,
very
100%.
susceptible, I think, to this kind of subtle change in the way working goes. I mean, I say this purely from working with nannies. Obviously, not. I haven't been a nanny, but I've spoken to over the last 4 or 5 years an awful lot
Yeah.
of nannies and families as well. And I hear a lot. It bubbles up a lot that suddenly a role becomes overwhelming, and it's very subtle in the way it all happens.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that is important to set this up is just having a look at the landscape as a whole. And this is probably where I've got a pretty good view, because we've got we get hundreds of roles, thousands of roles from agencies and from families, but we also work with nannies as well. So we're seeing both sides of it. There are three big trends that we're seeing at the moment that I think is impacting this. The first is the move of roles going from households to nurseries. So nannies are losing their roles because there's funding, there's 15 to 30 hours of funding coming from the government. Families are looking at that and going, well, actually, I can offset some of the cost here. And therefore, we're hearing of nannies losing their positions. And we're trying to work on that. We've got a petition going at the moment, which is pushing the government. We just want to get to the table to say to the government, this is unfair. It's not a level playing field. The next big thing that's happening in the marketplace, what's constantly there, ever present, is work from home and flexible working. So because since COVID especially, there are more flexible working, work from home opportunities. And that's changed the landscape in the terms of there are less full-time roles, or fewer, sorry, full-time roles. There are more part-time roles. We're seeing that because the parents are at home, the sole charge dynamic changes. They'll just step into the room and help out a little bit. And that's really is changed the nanny landscape as I've seen it over the last 12 months, 18 months, 2 years. And I think we're also seeing that families are trying to make their budgets work harder. And this comes onto the big mega trend of more nanny plus roles. And what I mean by nanny plus is it's a nanny plus housekeeping, nanny plus light housekeeping, not lighthouses as in lighter housekeeping. Nanny light housekeeper would be a new one. Nanny cook, nanny family assistant. Like, what does that mean? Nanny and willing to muck in. All of these very ambiguous terms. Nanny PA. Actually, that's one I really quite like. I feel that's the one that's interesting because it's two separate roles. If they can mesh, that's an interesting dynamic. But there are all nanny that will muck in, nanny light housekeeping. These are very kind of loose terms, and I think that that's difficult. That's because in any job you want a really good definition between the employer and the employee. And I think we're moving into territories where it's very loose. And I think that when it gets loose, it creates tensions. And I think the whole purpose of this chat is if there are tensions between nannies and families, let's explore these tensions and how can we manage them.
Yeah, Charlie's actually just added in the chat that for her it feels like it's only really after school nursery work at the moment that's around. Yeah, maybe you're struggling to find sort of the full-time roles. Is that where you're coming from, Charlie?
There are full-time roles out there, without a doubt. There are great agencies with full-time roles. There are families searching directly, but there are fewer of them, without a doubt, and therefore it's more competitive, which actually feeds into this really well. If it's a more competitive space, how does a nanny make themselves more appealing for roles? What do they have to do to get that role or to get the roles that are available?
Actually, this is something that I speak about in my development sessions, having worked in recruitment and seen the volume of applications that come through for those kind of full-time roles. So if you need advice, if anyone's listening to this and you want to kind of get your foundational admin together. That really is, if you're joining an agency, that's going to set you aside from a lot of people. But also if you work privately and you're finding jobs privately yourself, you're going to be a little bit more in control over whether you're going to receive an interview or not. So do let me know if you want to book a session and yeah, book that out. There's a lot to think about.
So in prep for this, we highlighted a few areas where we felt that the Nanny Plus roles were creating tension. And when I say Nanny Plus, I mean Nanny Plus other duties. So the first one that we had was employee and staff relationships are changing. So I see that as, I think we've kind of covered this off, is that families want a nanny to cover so much more now. It's almost like a Swiss Army knife role. The nannying isn't just childcare. A lot of the time, it's so much more. And also, I think that we talked about, if they have a nanny in the home, they want them now. It's not like a formal set aside position. It's much more integrated within the family life, within the family unit. They're an extension of the family. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Yeah.
And I think as well, because there are more part-time roles, that it's all becoming a lot less disciplined. That it isn't. Whereas if you were employing somebody for a 60-hour or 50-hour week role, and it was looking after 1 or 2 charges, and it would be it's a full-time position, it would be all very defined. But this kind of just the afternoons or just the mornings, the mindset's changed towards what the role is, and the mindset has become much more casual. It's just a part-time role. You know, actually, an hour in a full-time role looking after a toddler is just as important as an hour in a part-time role looking after a toddler. You know, it's the nature of the care hasn't changed. But it's the way it's been framed that's changed.
Exactly. And that's, you know, that's a really good point in thinking about how families do perceive having staff, and you know, do they look at them as just staff, or like you're saying, are they part of the family, and how do they manage other members of the family, and what is that family dynamic looking like? So it can be a very confusing space to work in. It's not like an office. You don't have clear rooms and roles where people really know where they stop and start. It's, you know, working in a family is a very transient experience, and so yeah, it makes it really difficult.
So the next area where we thought there's kind of a lot more informality and less discipline around, I think we've touched on this, but we coined a phrase which was unconscious creep, which sounds really bad. It sounds like somebody presenting a food program, but it's but I think what we mean by that is that things can just nudge on without anybody really noticing, and I think that's what we've seen. What I've seen, or from comments, I've seen quite a lot of that. The families don't realise that they're being more informal. It's just happening over time, or even the way they're asking for additional things to be done. It's all very casual.
Yeah, and often on the fly. And I think that makes it very difficult then as a nanny to know how to push back. If you can see a parent really like, oh my gosh, can you just unload the dishwasher, and then I need you to pick up X, Y, and Z, and I'll be back at 6, you know, or however it's delivered, the delivery of it can really affect, you know, probably not the right time now to say no, but you know it's not part of your role. You know that actually that might make you late in getting home, or so it's, it can be it's so difficult. It's such a difficult position to be in.
How would you say about, so if you're being asked, I think there's that moment where, oh my God, it's a really busy day. Can you just do this? Can you just do this? And obviously most nannies have this pleasing, they want to be able to please. But how would you just put a pause in place? How would you, because I think that if you can just somehow stop that chaotic flow and actually go, okay, I can help, but let's just take a pause, take a beat. What would you say about that?
Yeah, so I would say it depends how you're being asked. So if the communication is mainly via WhatsApp and texting, then I think you've got a bit of a moment to pause and probably be able to just have a couple of minutes to kind of go, okay, if I pick that person, you know, that child up then and have to do X, Y, and Z, it is going to make me late. So you know, you might have a bit more of an opportunity to push back. I think if it's in conversation and you're directly in front of someone, for me, it would be about, if you can't do it, if you have another commitment, then very gently saying, look, I know it's crazy. I'm really sorry, but I have something else that I've got planned and I've got to go. If you can do it, then fine, do it to help, but notice that and then maybe create a space to talk about that situation if it maybe happens again. But I think it's the delivery of the request. And sometimes the request can be not directly from the parent. It can be from the parent spoke to the housekeeper, or the parent spoke to the child, or, you know, you can get a delivery of requests from all sorts of people. So it's quite tricky to know how to respond. But yeah,
I think
creating space to chat.
Yeah, I think there's another kind of creep as well, which is natural role creep. So you can, when you start a role with a 6-month-old child, the role is going to be very different at 2.5, 3.
100%,
so, and because the roles change, it is a sense of role creep, because the dynamic, what you're being asked to do has changed, but it's only changed. It's changed for a very legitimate reason, in that, you know, you no longer have to change nappies and do bottle feeding. It's now kind of going to this, going to the nursery, or going to different activities. So there is a kind of natural role creep in there, which I think that can lead to a misalignment between what the nanny wants to be doing. Might be a nanny that's considers herself more of a baby nanny, and I think the nannies have surely got to manage that for themselves, haven't they? There might be a time when they go, you know what, my time here might be up.
Yeah, and I think that goes towards really knowing yourself as a nanny. When you first start out, it's quite tricky to know, do I prefer working with under 5s? You know, where do I sit in terms of childcare? But after a while, I think you start to learn where you really fit. And I think, if you know that the child is going to go to nursery, I would probably imagine that housekeeping or wider housekeeping duties will be introduced, because you're still being paid for the day. So families automatically think, well, I can't just pay you for nothing, so I'm going to introduce some other duties, so to kind of keep things going. So that's where, like, if it was a nanny PA role, then you might be able to accept that. But if it's not being discussed, it's a lot harder to navigate, I think.
Most of the things that we're going to cover, the most important thing is communication.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think the way a relationship starts, the way any relationship starts, the most important time to communicate is right at the beginning. And I think that with a lot of these roles, certainly with the more informal roles, is that people aren't laying things out and setting things out, and not setting expectations from day one. I know we've just talked about something where day 1 and day 600 might be very different, but I think for me, for a lot of the time, where I see the problems is that usually comes back, that's not very good. There hasn't been very good communication at the beginning.
Yeah. And I think quite often, when families are employing nannies, they're sometimes employing them in a bit of a rush. So the practical side is looked at. What hours can you do? Are you able to work from this time to this time on these days? This salary, but you're not actually thinking about the long term necessarily. And maybe yourself, maybe you're thinking, I've just got to take this job, I need to take it. So the value of having those really important conversations at the beginning isn't necessarily the focus. It's more, let's just get everything in place. And then we'll talk about it. But quite often then becomes, well, it doesn't happen because life is busy. That's why you're being employed as a nanny. You're facilitating a really sort of busy lifestyle.
I've just been reminded of something actually, which I hadn't thought of until you said that. We've been going for 5 years, 3 years, better. There used to be 3 months, like 2 months to 3 months, people would be putting jobs out there. I am writing ASAP on most of my roles these days, even the ones from agencies. A lot of them are ASAP. That also changes the landscape, because if you're thinking, well, I just need somebody quickly now to start, you're probably less diligent in the setup. I just need to find the person that can hit the ground running. There's another lovely cliche term, muck in, hit the ground running. But yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
so maybe that's another dynamic
It's
that
so true.
has changed that we hadn't really thought of, is that more and more people are operating in the moment, real time, rather than actually go,
Yeah,
well, this starts in 3 months' time. I quite like it now
yeah,
when I get a role that, or there's a role today that was posted, it was for March, just thinking, you know what, that's probably a pretty good lead time.
yeah. That's a great lead time. It's a great lead time, and then it's a really good transitional time if there is an existing nanny.
Another thing that is creating tensions is that the informality of communication channels. The,
Yeah.
I probably see this secondhand. I do see this secondhand. But what do you think about that? You know, whereas it used to be more regular, now it's like a WhatsApp or a text.
It is, and there's no hourly cutoff. So you can be contacted over the weekend. You can be contacted at 10 o'clock at night, first thing in the morning. It's a really difficult one. I don't think any families or even nannies really use, email to communicate. It is a WhatsApp kind of place. But again, if you haven't had the conversation about when your phone might be switched off, or whether over the weekend, and you haven't kind of set those parameters, that also can feel very triggering, because as a nanny, if you've given already 40 plus hours a week to that family, you're not really going to want to be in touch over the weekend. And then I remember when I was being contacted over the weekend, it would just give me that, like that sick feeling of, either what have I forgotten, or do I need to come in earlier on Monday and it might affect my Sunday plans, or so there was always it was always quite unnerving. I never really liked it, but I think it's much worse now. Yeah.
That's
I
actually
know. So,
another form of role creep, isn't it? Is that
yeah,
whereas before it used to be, communication to be around the working day, now
yeah,
you can text at 10 p.m. That
yeah,
is a kind of role creep, because suddenly you're having to go into the role to
yeah.
deal with a situation that might be tomorrow because of
Totally,
the informality of
totally.
communication.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly, exactly. Yeah, and it can be. I mean, I was saying to you, there's sort of the other way around, where families are very generous with their time and generous with their invitation for you to join them at lunch or dinner or something like that, and then they struggle a bit if it's over familiar. And so sometimes a nanny just needs to say no, and just needs to be able to say, actually, thank you for inviting me for lunch. Maybe you've been a couple of times, but now I'm just going to go and rest and take that time out. But
it's
that's a
that,
hard,
yeah, it's
yeah,
that juxtaposition between, yes, I'm
yeah, yeah,
there
yeah,
for the family, I look
yeah,
after
yeah,
the
totally.
children
I
of the
feel
family,
part
but
of it.
actually it's an employed role and it has terms
Yeah,
and conditions around it. So we
yeah,
looked at these tensions, and we found we talked about three things that would be pertinent when addressing these tensions. And the first one was, I think you came up with this term, which I love, which is create the space and own it. Do you want to talk
yeah,
about that?
yeah. So I think it's unrealistic to expect a family to stop what they're doing and go, gosh, do you know what? We've allowed Anna to work 50 plus hours, and we've put so much babysitting on her for this last month. And don't get me wrong, there are some amazing families who will do this. But on the whole, they're not really looking at that. They're looking at their family and their family needs, and you don't quite feature. So there's something about, in general, in your own life, you should try to create space for
Yeah,
yourself to reflect and to think about not just work but your personal situations, and make that time. But certainly when you're working in a private home, it's a very unique industry, and it's unless you've done it, it's very difficult to try and explain that to other people. So it's sort of down to the nanny to really own that, and kind of go, do you know what? I want to create this space where I can check in with the family and do a handover diary. And then maybe in like 2 weeks' time, when I first started, we can just, I don't know, reflect on how I've been working, and are they happy with what I'm doing? And then maybe in like another 6 weeks' time, again, another check. So it's a responsibility that you don't think you need to have at the beginning, but it's crucial. It is crucial to allowing you to manage or navigate if role
yeah.
creep comes in.
The next one that we picked out was communication is king, and this is my or queen. So this is my one. We touched on this already. That good communication, regular communication, having that sit down moment where even the informal cup of tea that happens every day, where you get to just say, making sure there's monthly reviews, making sure that if there is a log that's in place, log things, make sure it's shared, make sure it's read. I think that's really important, and I think we all get God. I get lazy in my work life, which isn't as in childcare. It's running the agency, but it's really important that those little things that we take for granted we maintain, because actually when things start to go wrong, they're the things that you lean into, and if you haven't maintained them, it then becomes awkward to start it again. Oh, why do you want the check-in? We haven't had that for months. We haven't had that for months. Why do you want one now? Is there an issue? If you've been doing it with regularity, there is no issue, and therefore when you raise something, it's not perceived as an issue. It's just the conversation that you always have. I couldn't manage to do X, Y, Z because it wasn't chatted about. Whereas if you've got to say, let's have a check-in and talk about X, Y, Z, you've automatically made it more than it is.
And it's a hard position in the sense of you kind of need to learn the language of the family, how they communicate with each other, and so that takes a while. But if you can just focus on your communication with the primary principal that you're working with, then that's kind of all you need to worry about.
So and I think the last bit to this section, which is exploring these emerging tensions, so how to avoid these tensions, set things up properly, and central to setting things up properly has got to be having a decent contract in place.
And bringing your contract to life. That's something that, again, families, unless they're business minded, legally minded, are not going to value at the beginning necessarily, because they're still focusing on, we need you now. And so that becomes quite tricky. So you need to know your contract, and you need to know what's really important to you, that your non-negotiables. And you need to know the areas that you're flexible with in your contract, but you do need to talk about it, because then it becomes a working document. And then once you've agreed your key areas that you're happy with, then it becomes the contract. But it's not, I'll just download it from Nanny Pay and I'll just hand you this, and you haven't taken the time to look at it, and maybe the family haven't taken the time to look at it. Because I guarantee when things go wrong, it will be the first thing that's looked at. The first thing. So it has to,
I always think that there has to be a mindset change on what a contract is, because I think for me a contract is just capturing all the conversations that have been agreed. There's nothing more than that. It's an amalgam of all of the little chats that have happened and go, okay, we'll do it like that. Okay, well, your holidays will be like that, or your, it's one that's pretty fixed, but you know what I mean, or your duties are this, and let's just capture that. It's almost like a capture document, because it seems to use the word contract, it becomes quite scary, and it's not. An interview is a conversation. It's the same mindset that we've got this language that makes it so much harder or scarier to enter these things. All a contract is a collective of all the agreed conversations put down on paper.
Exactly.
And therefore, if you don't have those conversations and there isn't that meeting of minds, there's not a contract.
No.
Exactly. So within contracts, maybe I think one of the things that, in order to get to that contract, it's really important that there are shared expectations on both sides. And part of shared expectations is knowing where the boundaries are between the nanny and the family. I call it red lines, which I know you found odd. And the reason I call it red lines is boundaries is that's just setting a boundary. You can step over a boundary, fine. I call it red lines because a red line is a boundary you shouldn't step over. It's an absolute hard, no, I won't do that, or I will do this. It's harder than a boundary, but it obviously is a boundary. So talking about red lines, I think that nannies should take more time in really understanding where their red lines are and actually writing them down. the things that you will do and you won't do, and then the things that you won't do, but you could do if it was the right relationship, or if it's, for me, I think these things are really important with nannies, especially in the modern world where jobs are requiring nannies to do more things. There's nanny plus, will you do housekeeping, light housekeeping? Will you, muck in? Will you? So I think that nannies, one of the things that they should do is have a look at the things that they don't think they want to do and the things that they might do, and actually just work out and the things they won't do, but challenge those things. I had a nanny the other day. She's a great nanny. She's got really good experience, but she wasn't willing to travel at all. There's no travel at all. Anything that had the word travel in it was absolutely just discounted. She was struggling to find a role. And the conversation went along the lines of, well, this role does have some travel in it, but would you not, it's just weekend travel, or it's to the Cotswolds, or would you not consider doing that? And having a chat with her, just like saying, think about this. It might not be as arduous as you think, actually meant that she was open for more roles. So I think that's what this really got to be about.
Yeah.
So I think that for me, it's about, if you've got understanding where your red lines are, but then understanding where you can dilute them a bit, or where you can be more accommodating to fit in with the new role, I think is really important.
Yeah, I agree.
So when you're forming a contract, it's really important that there's an understanding of where these red lines are, and whether I'm okay with that, I'm not okay. Otherwise, your contract, your form together probably isn't that effective. That it will break down. For me, a failed relationship is when you have to pull out the contract to go, well, it doesn't say this. That's the worst situation.
Yeah. It is. And I think, it's down to just not assuming that someone always knows where you're coming from.
Yeah.
So I think families probably think they're speaking quite clearly sometimes about their expectation of a nanny, and it isn't always that clear. Sometimes they're making it up as they go along, because maybe they've never had a nanny before, and it's all very new to them. But again, for yourself, it's also really, if you know what you can and can't do, if you know those red lines, you're going to be a lot clearer in that interview. You're going to be a lot clearer when you talk about your non-negotiables and what you can flex on.
But that comes with an opportunity cost, doesn't it? Because if you say, well, I don't want to go anywhere near the dishwasher or washing machine. If I'm doing the child's load and there's a family load there, I won't touch any of that because that's not my responsibility. And that's fine. It's the nanny's prerogative to be able to do that. However, that's going to discount them from an awful lot of roles, especially in this modern environment where they want more flexibility. They want the nanny to be part of the family, and I think as long as nannies realise that there is an opportunity cost to everything that you set out that you don't want to do, then fine. It's no problem.
Yeah, but it's just like you say, it's just having that awareness and that clarity before they give their hard no.
So when it comes to these additional roles, it's also really important to have them in the contract and to have them itemized and put down. If there's a lot of things that go outside of childcare, same approach as you would with childcare responsibilities, you have with the non-childcare responsibilities. Agreed? That's
agreed.
Also, what about if there are, because there are changes over time. We talked about the job with a 9-month-old is not the same as with a 3-year-old, and it might be so. Would you be opening up your contract and changing your would you creating a moment to adapt the contract?
Yeah, I would. Unless you have amazing communication with the family and you've been there a while and everything, that you've kind of proven your conversation skills beforehand, if there were any issues and changes even with the baby, leading up to that time. But I think I think it's always within the first year of you working, you should always check and have a check-in with the family. That child's developmental needs are going to be far more different to when you first started. So that's the first thing. You need to see, well, what does that child need now? Are they could be presenting in any different way. So that's the first thing. And then your circumstances might have changed. Your life might have, changed. So you have to mirror that and create space to reflect your change and your development in your career.
I think there's a sunny side spin to this as well, which is if there is a fundamental change in responsibilities in the role and you potentially having to open up the contract, is that an opportunity to talk about pay?
Yes. I think, do you know what? Nannies are so nervous about talking about pay, and I think that's one of the most common. Even when I was interviewing nannies, when I was in recruitment, and I would say to them, how much are you looking for? This is if they haven't applied directly for a role, they just want to register. And it's a very personal subject, and it's a very emotive subject. And you might have been brought up to never talk about money, or you might not know really what the market is or where to look. And so yes, I think again, being very aware of where a lot of agencies will publish like salary surveys to kind of give you an idea of what you can earn. But I definitely think there's opportunities to talk about pay. And I think it's about looking at yourself and thinking, just thinking about the value that you're bringing. If you started 3 years ago and this family have gone on to have twins, and you've really kind of grown with the family, you have developed your career hugely. You have walked those children through really important milestones, and you're competent at doing that. And the next family that have you are going to have this huge amount of experience. So yes, just because you're staying with the family doesn't mean that you have to stay with that same salary,
Yeah, I agree.
It has to be reflective.
I think that I've seen so many times that a family will lose a nanny, and then suddenly they'll position the new nanny role because they've just lost their nanny, probably because they might have been slightly underpaid, but they'll go jump ahead of, suddenly they've got to be competitive in new marketplace. Actually, if they progressed their nanny's salary and the nanny had, there's this thing about managing upwards as well. It's not all about the family saying your pay is good. There's a responsibility from the nanny to manage the family as well, as much as the employee manages the employer.
Yeah, and it kind of also again goes back to that beginning conversation you're having when you're talking about your contract and your salary. Then the salary is can be presented in so many different ways. You could get a weekly salary, and then it's a different salary for babysitting. It might be a different kind of salary for holiday travel, and then you might even get a yearly bonus or a pension, or well, you will get a pension, but you might get gym membership or something like that. So your salary and your package is you kind of naturally have that conversation when you first open up your contract. So putting a little marker and creating that space to talk about yearly reviews are really crucial, I think.
So the next part of this is really about the saying no bit. Because in every role, guaranteed, there'll be moments when you're asked to do additional things. And some of those things will be absolutely great and you can understand why you're being asked and it's the natural progression, but some of those things will jar. And I think the first thing to do when approached is there's a reasonableness test. And that's, you go with your intuition. Is that a reasonable thing? Does that fit in with the general direction of how this role goes and how I work with the family? And I think it's important. It is very important to remember that you are in a relationship. And it's an intimate relationship. You're looking after the most precious thing in the world to those families, their children. You're in their home, and they're asking you to do something. So what's the relation? Do you agree there that relationship is absolutely key? First thing you do.
Relationship is yeah, it is. And again, you need to know how comfortable you are talking and communicating in your personal relationships, because it does feed into how you will approach your working relationships. So it is really key, and the relationship still needs to have boundaries, like you said before. You need to understand, like they talk about in relationships, the love language. You kind of need to know the language within the family to know how you can, when best to speak to the parents, when, how to approach something. Some parents want something written down, some parents, you know, a quick WhatsApp is fine. Sometimes they really need to kind of be pulled from their life and actually made to sit down. So yeah, that relationship is key, and transparency and communication is fundamentally part of the ingredients to make that work.
I think as well, when you're being asked to do new things, I think you've got to see things in the round. You've got to look at the relationship you've got with it. Is it respectful? You know, is it
short term?
You know, as much as they've asked for something additional, could the nanny, oh, I can't make it that day, I've got to do this. You know, is there a give and take that this is just part of that give and take process? That's really also, you know, the family situation, just like nannies, just like all of us, you know, the families that employ nannies go through difficult times, and sometimes if there's a tough moment, you know, maybe a grandparent that's ill, they're just life, everybody's life gets in the way, and actually they might be asking their nanny to step up. And I think that seeing things in the moment, does it make sense? Is there a reason why there is an additional task here? It's not something I'd usually do, but I can actually understand it and go, do you know what? Yeah, in the round, I can see that's a reasonable request.
Yeah, understanding the impact on you, and then understanding the impact on the child. So if you are doing lots of hours, the impact on you is you're going to be really, really tired. The impact on the child is you're not going to be able to bring the energy to that child that they need. So yeah, it's sort of measuring that impact. And if it's a soft impact, it might put you out a little bit for occasionally. That might be okay, because you also might need that flexibility back if something happens in your personal life, right? So
yeah, two-way. And then the other thing that I have in my head as well, and I hear this a lot, that I've had calls from parents, oh my gosh, they're asking me to do this. The dishwasher and the washing machines seem to be the things that unpick relationships.
The family laundry, the family.
Now, if I had a glass and I go and put it in the dishwasher's full. There's two things I can. I just dump my glass in the sink and then walk away, or I can unpack the dishwasher. If you've got adults in the household, surely there's got to be some. You know, you are an adult operating in your place of work happens to be a family home. Surely there's got to be a bit of give and take there. That it's not saying you've got to empty the dishwasher every time.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to put something in it and it's full, the natural thing to do is empty it, isn't it?
Yeah. And also it just keeps things ticking over for the good. Like you're saying, looking at it as a round, you know, it just keeps things ticking over. But if it's constant and it's taking you away from your childcare, then yes, you know, or if it's taking you, you know, if it's the last thing that you're doing and it's making you late leaving your job, then yes, of course, you need to question that. But it is,
So we're saying, like, ideally, if it's something you think you can embrace as working as a team, then great. Maybe you should just embrace it. However, there's going to be requests that are made and it's still a no.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, how do we say no without making it combative? And I think that there's some things we can do here is, I think firstly, it's really important that if you're being asked to do something and you've thought about it, it's still a no, take it out of text messages, take it out of WhatsApp, ask for a face-to-face meeting. You know, think about what are the options, or is there another option? I can't do that, but perhaps we could do this instead, or perhaps we could. Is there a better solution that you can set? Or maybe the home help can do that, or maybe. Do you know what my focus is? The childcare. Do you need to get home help as well? You know, there are ways of. I must say that would probably annoy a mum or a dad intensely to say that, but there are ways of positioning things. I think that.
Well, yeah, there are, and I think also it's about in a WhatsApp message. Again, depending on when you've had a request delivered to you, the tone can be hugely misread.
Yeah.
And your no might sound really arrogant, and their request might sound really dictatorial. You know, so having that face to face in the morning, if it's not late at night, or whenever you can, just softens and respects both of your places that you're coming from.
Yeah.
And it kind of creates a safe space then for that challenging communication. Again, you have to kind of know, okay, what do I feel comfortable in talking about? Do I feel comfortable in bringing things up? How do I feel comfortable in bringing things up? is it going to make them fire me? If that's what you're worried about, then there's a real mistrust in that relationship.
But,
So
yeah, there's something else going wrong there.
yeah.
The other thing is as well that could you do this?
Yeah.
The other thing to raise is that actually, what's the opportunity cost of doing that? So if it's going to dilute the care, I think you bring this up, you brought this up a couple of times. One of the pushbacks is I can, but I can't do this, and my primary responsibility is looking after boy 3, twins 7.
Yeah.
You know, say the opportunity cost of things is really important.
Yeah.
I also think another thing that nannies can do is go, okay, let's just I've heard you there, but let's take a moment to review let's put that schedule in place, schedule a meeting to actually talk about the role and how it's changing and formalize these changes and get them defined and in the contract. You know, certainly for roles that have been going for a while that suddenly are changing, the scope creep is there. Just take a beat, like pause, reset it with them, and then decide whether you want to move forward. Also, you have the ability to leave roles. There are that's an important thing. It's a sad thing if they like the role, but for certain things there's been a mismatch. But fundamentally, you're not trapped. And I think that's really important for nannies to realise that if they try everything and it's still not working out, and I think a lot of nannies, they forget that it's a job, that they get so wedded to the children that they can't extricate themselves, even though it's a really bad environment for them.
You know, I think that's a really important point, actually, because despite your relationship with the parents, 9 times out of 10, you are loving those children hard. And you are so aware of the need for you being in that household that if you were to leave, you know the impact of those children, you know the impact of the family. There's so much guilt because you are emotively working. It's such an emotive role. So again, it kind of goes back to, are you rushing into the role when you first applied? Was it just about the money? Because again, some people stay in the roles too long because the money is safe. Maybe there aren't roles around the area that they're working in, you know, they don't really come up that much. And that can create tension. That can create a lot of difficulty in being able to kind of create that space that we're talking about. So yes.
The other challenge as well, which you spoke about before this webinar, which was that nannies compare themselves to other nannies. So like we all do on social media, we post the perfect situation. Or there's also a lot of, I feel there's a lot of nannies out there that will post stuff that just isn't realistic. That they'll see a debate between nannies, and then they'll picture, well, I'd be asking for this, and actually you wouldn't be. I mean, it's just that can be very demoralising, I think.
It can, and it goes hand in hand with looking at the latest sort of social media trends that, you know, parents are doing with children and development tips and all these kind of, when Jo Frost did her thing, she was kind of saying the naughty step was, you know, the way forward, and actually, you know, that's not necessarily the best way forward for children and discipline. And, you know, so there's a lot of, try not to compare. It's very easy to, especially if you've got it's quite an isolating position. And I think there needs to be an acknowledgement that actually your nanny community can really kind of take you through quite tough times. But it's also bringing it back to, but what did you sign off for? What did you agree to at the beginning? And how can you navigate out, you know, a different change?
So we've looked at some ways in that we've kind of how you can push back on things constructively without being so combative in just saying no. But there will be times that a nanny does have to say no, and very clearly and unequivocally put her foot or his foot down and just say no. And I think that as much as we all try and smooth over things and we try and make them non-combative, sometimes actually it's really important to assert yourself. And I think that it's a kind of form of self-care and boundary setting, isn't it? That actually sometimes if there is an expectation to keep going collecting the dry cleaning for one of the parents every day at 11:30 when this has just suddenly been thrown, and there's young children involved, so you've got to get the kids together, go out there, do this regimented. no, that's not, that's an
Yeah,
unfair expectation.
yeah,
I mean, that's probably a
yeah.
poor example. There are much more powerful examples. But yeah, I think that when a nanny has to say no, they've got to do it confidently. They've got to be assertive. It doesn't have to
You're
lead
not,
to conflict.
no, it doesn't. And also, it's really easy to keep on understanding a family's emotional needs. And I think nannies are one of the most empathic community.
Yeah,
I mean, they're just incredible at what they do. So at some point, you've got to start looking at yourself. At some point, you have to put yourself first and really value who you are, and your ability to say no is so, it's kind to you. And you're doing that consistently every single day with the family, but there has to be those moments where you can be kind to yourself too.
yeah, and
Love the other thing.
I think that when that happens, it won't just be on the first response. No, it'll be after when you get to the point of going no. It's because there's been a degree of taking advantage of, assuming.
Yeah.
So I think when you get to that point, one is have some backup on the reasons why.
Hmm.
Be very clear on why you're asserting yourself. Be confident about it. Be really clear and assertive. Back it up,
Yeah.
and also prepare, because it's been a journey to get to that point. You should have also had time to think about why you're saying no and be able to explain it and rationalize it. It's not just a
Yeah.
sudden gut instinct no.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah. Yeah.
you think about their reaction to it and how you're going to respond to that. If I'm saying no to this, they're going to come back with this, and this is how I'm going to respond. You've got to
Yeah.
that point where it's got quite hard. Be prepared. And I
Yeah.
think there's a degree of stick to it as well. Like, stick to your guns.
Yeah. Otherwise, you really are setting yourself up for continued plus roles. They just won't take you seriously. And then once that happens, then you've really lost that relationship, and you've lost a sense of yourself, because you'll end up resenting it, and you'll feel like, gosh, I'm doing so much for these children and I'm not being appreciated. And yet, if you're not putting those parameters in place, you can't expect to have that respect and kind of empathy. But it's tough. I mean, it's a tough thing to do when you're in the middle of doing the job, which is why it's so important to create those processes at the beginning, when you're not in the job, when you're not emotionally connected enough to the families to worry about how it's going to affect them.
Yeah.
That's,
I I think that's a pretty good overview of role creep
yeah,
and how to say
I think
no.
so.
I think if I was to summarize it, I'd say that we started off, we were looking at the situations like why role creep's happening, understanding why you're being asked to do the new things in the new environment of childcare. Also, then how to kind of push back on those things in not in soft ways, or to challenge them, and then finally finishing there on actually when it gets to a difficult point and you have to say no, how to say no respectfully, and then if you have to say no, to really assert yourself, be confident in it, and be
Yeah,
assertive.
yeah.
I do think
Is it?
the one thing that reigns above all of this, sorry Anna, is
No, no.
communication. I think
Yeah,
communication right at the beginning, setting the boundaries, a great contract. That's a contract is a form is a static capture of communication. It's really
yeah,
important.
yeah,
But
yeah,
even regular communication, don't break the regularity of communication, because as soon as you do, you have to call a meeting. It's more that you've automatically made it more than what it was.
yeah. And you can explore it so gently at the beginning of the discussions. You can say, look, I really love to have monthly chats, and then eventually, after we kind of get used to the way we're working, maybe every 3 months would be really useful. What times, what days would really suit you? The family's going to really appreciate that proactiveness around it. They wouldn't have even thought about it probably. So again, it kind of shows you as the expert, the professional. Yeah, and I think that also stands you apart from other nannies when you're in interviews. If you're aware of this and able to almost go, look, I kind of know my role inside out. Like, you don't need to worry about this. They're going to employ you, rather than a nanny coming in going, yeah, no, yeah, okay.
Yeah, be assertive, manage upwards.
Be
It's,
assertive.
it's your career.
Yeah. It is, it is. And word of mouth is strong. So, you know, you've got to kind of create that air of professionalism.